The Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission has put Nigeria's total oil and condensate reserves at 37.28 billion barrels, and total gas reserves are now put at 210.54 trillion cubic feet. Now, this is contained in the official National Petroleum Reserves document as at the 1st of January 2025, but which was released on Friday, April 11, that's today. NUPRC Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Gbenga Komolafe made the declaration in a statement personally signed by him, a copy of which was made available to Arise News on Friday. Now, while the oil component stands at 31.44 billion barrels, the condensate reserves stand at 5.84 billion, amounting to 37.28 billion barrels. The NUPRC boss is also delighted at the figures, which show a reserve life index of 64 years for oil reserves and 93 years for gas, indicative of Nigeria's huge oil and gas wealth. Right, for more on these stories, I'm joined now by energy expert Kelvin Emmanuel. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight tonight.
Thank you for
I guess I got excited by, the last piece of news. How exciting is that actually for you, that Nigeria has huge reserves, whether it's gas or oil we're talking about? Let's start from there.
It's not exciting for me because Nigeria has not lived up to expectation. Nigeria has always been a country that is in transit and that has potential, but never lives up to expectation.
Right.
And the reason why I say this is because Guyana, that happens to be one of the sweetest chick on the block for production of crude oil around the world, only achieved first oil 5 years ago. Nigeria has been in this business for 57 years, and we're at 1.47 million barrels. Guyana is now at 660,000 barrels of crude in 5 years. ExxonMobil, as an operator, is at 660,000 barrels of crude. Chevron has gone ahead to acquire a stake in Hess Energy that owns a significant reserve in Guyana and is hoping to raise that output to 1.3 million barrels. Libya in North Africa, that had its dictator Gaddafi killed many years ago after Arab Spring, that doesn't have a central government, is doing 1.3 million barrels of crude. So why will Nigeria, that has a central government with a democratically elected president, with a matured oil and gas regulatory sector that is respected around the continent, be doing 1.47 million barrels of crude?
Why do you think we're not able to live up to expectations?
The reason why we're not able to live up to expectations, the reasons are multifaceted. Okay, it's hydra-headed problem. Some has to do with regulation, lack of proper regulatory framework. Some has to do with the state-owned enterprise. You have a state-owned enterprise, NNPC, that is largely not functional. So I'll give you an example. NNPC, for example, there's an unregistered joint venture, for example, that's supposed to recover maybe 750 million barrels of crude.
Right.
So, and field development for it, after all the field development plans has been approved by the regulator UPRC, maybe it's going to cost $30 billion. NNPC, for example, owns 40% of the field, and based on that, is supposed to contribute 40% of the capex of $30 billion.
Yeah.
Historically, NNPC doesn't contribute. It says, we're the state-owned enterprise holding the government share upstream.
Right.
So we're good for it. So if you carry us, we'll pay you back through what they call joint venture cash calls, where they are amortized capital expenditure through carry oil that is largely untaxed, as reflected in sections 263 and 302 of the PIA.
Right.
Yes. And then you pay joint venture cash calls through OPEX. And this has been discouraging for the operators, because you have a situation where for many years, some time ago, their cash calls were delayed for maybe 7 years, and they were owed over $5 billion, in joint venture cash calls that were accumulated over a period of time. And they were not subjected to London Interbank offered rate LIBOR, which is what's offered for USD loans for international operators. This is a discouragement. Even the fields that NNPC, NEPL, the arm of NNPC Group, that is responsible for exploration and production, that it owns 100% upstream, are not directly operated by NNPC, because despite the fact that it has 5,000 staffs, nearly 5,000 staffs, and it pays over 500 billion naira per year in emoluments to its staffs,
right,
it doesn't have the technical competence to actually operate the fields and drill the crude oil and trap the gas by itself.
Wow.
It doesn't have it. You have issues like vandalization, the fact that there is lack of fiscalization. Nigeria does not know the actual amount of crude oil that comes to surface on a daily basis.
So the new kid on the block, the new guys, the new team has its job cut out for it. But you know what? We could actually spend all night talking about NNPC and Nigeria's oil sector. But let's very quickly, come to the issue of the Naira for crude sale. It's looking good. I mean, petrol dealers are excited. Petron is excited about it, saying it will translate to, cheaper petrol for Nigerians at the pumps. And then throw into the mix the, reduction in the global crude oil price. It's hovering around $59, $60 per barrel now. Nigerians are saying, how come we're still buying fuel at such high figures, around $9.50, at the pump price? Why is it not reflecting that?
So there are several dynamics. First of all, it was a good decision that the Federal Executive Council made to enforce Naira for crude. And I've always said that, listen, the immediate past management of NNPC antagonized Dangote for no reason. And this new management is showing that, look, NNPC is a shareholder in Dangote. They invested $1 billion for 7.2%. And they are stakeholders. So if the refinery succeeds, the government succeeds. Because they collect tax, they collect dividends, and wherewithal. Listen, there are different components that goes into pricing PMS.
Right.
If you're pricing PMS according to Platts, which is a global system that measures petroleum pricing around the world for about 812 refineries, if I'm not mistaken, you basically multiply the cost of a metric ton of petrol according to Platts. You multiply it by the exchange rate. The exchange rate is dropping.
Right.
And the reason why it's interesting is because the dollar index has dropped about 4% in the last 24 hours because the Japanese and the Chinese are dumping the US treasuries they hold. Okay? So if your exchange rate is dropping, but the crude oil price is dropping, you have almost like a net off.
Right.
So the question we should ask is, why is it that despite the fact that CBN says it has next reserves of $23.1 billion,
which is what
the
really
Naira is not
about
appreciating, considering that the US dollar index internationally is dropping against majors like the British pounds, the euro, the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan. Why is it not dropping?
Why is it not?
Why is the Naira instead losing value? Which calls into question the net foreign exchange reserves that the CBN claims it has. Okay, so in calculating the price of PMS, you have to factor in all of the exchange rate, because it's basically you multiplying the cost of a metric ton of PMS according to Platts by your exchange rate, let's say 1,623 or 24 naira per dollar today, divided by 1,341 liters of PMS, which is how many liters you have per metric ton of PMS.
Oh my.
Okay? If you multiply that,
don't confuse me any further.
You get anywhere around 950, 970 naira per liter. That's the figure you arrive at.
Right.
So now let's say the Naira for crude comes in and Dangote can move around, okay? And he's decided that, okay, he's not going to price according to the dollar, the Platts system, because they're offering him Naira, crude in Naira.
Yes.
The real price at which he's offering the market is anywhere around maybe 810 and 820 naira per liter. And I'll tell you why that is. Because for every liter of PMS that he prices, he's applying what they call an equalization fund to create a uniformity of pricing.
Oh.
So it's not enough for you to collect PMS at single point mooring by best vessel or at the gantry at the refinery in Lagos. There's so many other factors that goes into petroleum pricing. Outside of the X-gate, which is your X-gate price plus refiner's premium, you have things like the cost of the vessel, the cost of demurrage. You have things like throughput, which is about $2.09 per metric ton. You have an excise levy that is collected by NIMASA if it's a vessel. You have an excise levy collected by NMDPRA if it's by gantry.
So the long and short of all of this is we're not about to buy petrol cheaper anytime soon. Is that what you're saying?
If the
or that Dangote and other local refineries will be making a lot of sacrifices for for the price of petrol to come down.
So since the Naira for crude started, they said they've supplied 84 million barrels.
So far?
I'll tell you that only about 22 million of that 84 was supplied in Naira.
Oh.
Okay, so even the 385,000 barrels per day that the government says they supply to the refinery is actually anywhere, what they were actually supplying was around 110, 120,000 barrels per day. Nigeria needs about 450,000 barrels per day to solve its daily demand, because daily demand for PMS is hovering around 32 to 35 million liters of PMS. The numbers that NMDPRA gives is not true, in my opinion, because they use the projection system.
So in other words, the forces of demand
consumption
and supply may not really be playing out here.
The forces of demand and supply will not play out if the Naira keeps falling, which defies gravity. And the reason it defies gravity is simple. If the dollar index is dropping, Naira is supposed to appreciate. If the Naira is falling, it means the CBN does not have the net external reserves it says it claims it to have.
That is the underlying issue here. We have to say thank you very much. Kelvin, Emmanuel is an energy expert. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight.